Hello, this is Mike Peters from ChinaDaily.com, and I'm here with Dr. Geoff Raby, who is retiring as the Australian ambassador to China. Dr. Raby, let me start by congratulating you on completing your 4.5-year mission here. I've been reading a lot about your future plans. Can you tell us a little bit? I understand you're not going to retire to the countryside and grow vegetables.
No, thank you very much, Mark. I'm delighted to be on ChinaDaily.com. Thanks very much for the opportunity to talk. No, I'm not the retiring type, at least not just yet. I've had a great 4.5 years as ambassador here. I'm the longest serving Australian ambassador in 40 years of diplomatic relations, and the only ambassador from Australia who's gone to every province of China, all 31 on official travel. Wow. So I'm very pleased and satisfied with my time here. But China is such an interesting, exciting place, and a number of opportunities came my way, and I decided to end 27 years of public service, 27 years in diplomacy, and to set up my own business in China. I'm going to Xiahai, as they say, jump into the ocean, and start a whole new career. So I'm looking forward to the next stage of my professional development very much.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that consulting work will be?
Okay, well, look, first and foremost, I decided a long time ago that if I were to leave the bureaucracy after such a long time, I didn't want to join another bureaucracy. So my model has been to represent a number of Australian firms and then to build out from there. I've got 3 firms that I've signed up with as their representative in China. One's a major law firm, Cause. The press release just put out today on that. Another one is Riverstone, which is a merger and acquisitions firm based in Sydney, but it specialises in the resource sector. And there are 2 banks currently competing with each other. Haven't made up my mind which one I'll go with, and I have to look at how I can manage that. And the other one I've signed up with is an insurance company from Australia that's interested in working with Chinese insurance companies in funds management. So it's basically a split between resources and the finance sector, which is what you'd expect, I think, if you're coming from Australia and largely representing Australian firms. I've also managed to secure 2 directorships, non-executive directorships, one with a technology company that's involved in a partnership with China Telecom, and another one is a gold mining company which has no interest in China whatsoever. So I've got a fairly full plate, and I suspect there'll be an announcement soon about my taking up a professorship with an Australian university. So I think I'm going to be fairly busy.
But I don't hear any Australian wine portfolios in or wine companies in your portfolio. Seems like an oversight.
Well, danger is I might drink the profits. But there may well be, I can't talk about it yet, but there may well be a wine business in my portfolio as well.
You were in China twice before you were the ambassador here. So I think beginning in 1986, you had a posting here. Having been in China such a long time, can China still surprise you?
Absolutely. People ask me, people say to me, you must know China. And I say, well, there are many, many Chinas, and I'm still discovering different Chinas. But the only thing China doesn't surprise me in is its capacity to surprise. And that's inevitable. As we know, it's a huge country, massive population, great regional diversity, multi-ethnic, extremely long, continuous history. You put that all in the mix, and it is a very dynamic, vibrant, and ever unfolding and ever interesting place to be.
Is there a particular change that sticks out in your mind that's happened during that time?
More than anything else, well, 2 things I should say. One, just the tremendous improvement in people's living standards. I mean, I was regarded in the 1980s, I was the embassy's economist and ran the economics section. I was often regarded as being a bit naive and over-optimistic about China's outlook. But I can assure you that although I was very positive about the outlook for China under the Deng Xiaoping reforms, which were only a few years old in those days, China has far, far exceeded my most optimistic outlook. The other great change, though, of course, is that the barriers between foreigners and local Chinese have been removed. When I was here in the 80s, we almost lived in a world separate from all other Chinese. And for that to be removed in the way it has, and the openness of the society, the ability for people to move freely around the country, to choose their own jobs, to choose where they live, this is just a completely different world than the 1980s.
I've heard you say several times that your government and your country should be more engaged with China. What's the message that you take back home to Australians and Australian business?
Two principal messages. One, whereas once we were very much ahead of the rest of the world in understanding China's likely trajectory of economic development and its implications for Australia, and then put the resources in to support that through a very big diplomatic effort. Quite frankly, the rest of the world's worked it out as well, and the rest of the world has rushed here, and I think we've been a bit complacent in terms of how we've dealt with the relationship in terms of government investment of resources into the relationship. We haven't increased our diplomatic footprint in China since 1995, and that's something that I've talked about publicly, and you'd imagine I've talked about it privately.
So that's why you're racing around all 31 provinces.
Yeah, exactly. And in doing so, I've discovered a truth about China that wasn't, until I started doing that, I think very well understood in Australia, and that is that economic growth and development has spread like a wildfire beyond the coastal fringe of China, the eastern seaboard, beyond the major 3 or 4 cities of China to the so-called second, third and fourth tier cities. And that when we go there as Australia, because we don't carry the weight of the United States, for example, when we go there as an Australian business or Australian government officials, we can do a lot. The doors are open. The local officials are very pleased to see us and very pleased to work with us. So it's only smart that we would put our marginal diplomatic effort, speaking as an economist, into the areas where the returns are most likely to be highest. And for us, the returns are going to be much higher in these places that haven't had the same attention from the international community as the eastern seaboard has.
In the second and third tier cities?
Second and third tier cities and provinces, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what the primary areas of trade are between China and Australia, and how the second-tier cities play into that?
Well, Australia and China have profound complementarity between the economies. We have huge amounts of resources and not many people, and we don't have the capital through our own savings to develop those vast resources. China has itself a very good resource base, but it's not so good when you divide it by 1.3 billion people. And whilst 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, China was largely self-sufficient in most of its resources and energy needs, today it's utterly dependent on world markets. And we are a nearby, highly competitive, highly efficient supplier. So the trade is driven by resources and energy, hugely underpinned. They account for about 60% of our total exports with China. But it's very interesting. China is our largest services market. We have 138,000 students studying in Australia from China. That's more in absolute terms, I understand, than in the United States or the United Kingdom. We have nearly 500,000 Chinese tourists come to Australia. They're each year. They're the second biggest group in terms of number, but in terms of spend, how much money they spend as tourists, they are by far the biggest source of tourist income in Australia. So the services trade is extremely important. And of course, we are essentially a services economy. Whilst we have a huge resources base, Australia is a highly urbanised economy. Most people live in cities, and most people do services work. And the bulk of employment in Australia is in the services sector. So it's very important that we develop the services trade. And I think this is where the second and third tier cities are so very important to Australia. And as I speak, the Trade Minister, Craig Emerson, is leading almost 100 business people to 5 cities. One's first tier, Guangzhou, but the others we classify as second or third tier, Wuhan, Chongqing, Chengdu, Changsha, and then he'll end up in Shanghai. But this will go a long way to promote the services trade between us. And the sorts of things I'm talking about are environmental services, water treatment, building and construction. Green building is very important for us. A whole range of environmental areas, many areas. So sport and recreation, all these things we have very big strengths in, and the second and third tier cities at the stage of their development are very interested in cooperating with us in these areas. I should say also our banks are already well established outside the major cities of China, both as equity shareholders in township banks and as branch banks, spread all over the country. Henan, Chongqing, Chengdu, you'll find Australian banks operating.
Some reporters, I think especially from your own country, can't seem to resist writing about you without saying, Australia's outspoken ambassador to China. How do you feel about that label, and does it work to your advantage?
As a public servant, one cringes at the idea of being labelled as outspoken. I don't believe I've been outspoken, but I think an important part of an ambassador's job is public diplomacy. And to have credibility, you actually have to, I think, have some of your own thoughts and not just be seen solely as a mouthpiece of the government. Obviously, I'm here to represent government policy and do represent it, and I'm not in the business of debating government policy, but within that constraint that is quite proper and normal for a public servant to work within, I think there's great scope for ambassadors to share their ideas and views, and people are interested and want to hear.
You're a well-known economist, and I've been to press conferences where I've seen you get quite animated with graphs and charts. A lot of people subscribe to the idea of economics as being the dismal science. What are we missing, the rest of us, that excites you so much about economics?
Very good question. Look, I think economics is a way of ordering your thinking about what's happening in the world around you. It's an intellectual discipline. It helps you, I think, identify what the key variables and factors are. My undergraduate work was all in sort of theoretical end of economics. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess, my maths wasn't good enough to carry that into postgraduate work, where the level of maths gets very exacting. But at the same time, I became less excited by the theoretical dimensions of economics and very interested in the question of long-run economic growth and long-run economic change. And this was back in the 60s, where a lot of people didn't work on those sorts of subjects, and it only was taught in economic history departments, which by and large around the world don't exist any longer. But what it does do is give you the opportunity to examine over long periods of time the interaction between institutions, technology, demographic change, and political factors. And I found that was great. I did my postgraduate work in those areas. I did on long-run economic change in Australia, starting in the 18th century, going into well into the 19th century. And it gave me a toolkit, if you like, that has made it very, it really improved my understanding of what's happening in China and to witness what's happening here. I've got many points of reference to help with what's happening in China in a historical context. And I just think it greatly improves your understanding of the world around you.
Personal question. You have been in China for quite a while, and you've decided for now to keep China as your home. What do you like to do here when you're not working?
Well, I have a very big interest in the artistic life. I was very lucky in the 80s to be very much involved in the early Chinese contemporary art movement. And I spoke before about how there was such a separation between local Chinese and Laowai in the 80s. But there was one area where it was possible to build relationships with local Chinese, and that was amongst the artists, who tended to be fringe dwellers on society in those days. And this are the young contemporary artists. Some from those days are today quite famous and established. But many of them became my friends, and many